Time now. What's up, giant monster fans? Pete here from the Lassercast. And me and my friend Danny, we like to talk about horror movies and horror shows that are streaming or in theaters right now. And so today we are not talking about any kind of like slasher or like really disturbing horror, but a big chunk of horror is the monster horror, right? How many times can I fucking say horror in an intro? Maybe five. Anyway, Danny, have you been a Godzilla fan since like you were a kid, or do you not like Godzilla? How do you feel about that big green guy?
I love Godzilla. When I was sick and needed to stay home from school, my dad would go to our local video store, Flo's Video, right across the street,
Right.
before Big Bad Blockbuster came around. And if he wanted to rent me like sure things that like would not miss, all he had to do was rent me Toho Godzilla movies and 3-episode He-Man compilations.
Nice.
And my grandmother would come upstairs and stay with me when I was sick, and I would watch the same 5 to 10 Godzilla movies over and over and over again. And in fact, I fell asleep last night. There's a streaming channel called Midnight Pulp,
Okay.
and they have a lot of the original Toho Godzilla movies. I was actually watching one of my favorites, which I just learned is actually not liked by Toho themselves. Godzilla versus Hedorah, which in America was the smog monster.
Yes.
And so apparently the director of that movie was like told, you can't make any more Godzilla movies. And he is one of the executive producers on this show, Yoshimitsu Banno. So a little like, crossing of the generations there. But yeah, I loved Godzilla growing up. It didn't matter if he was the bad guy and he was scary, if he was the good guy and he was jumping around. Which one is it? Megalon, where Jet Jaguar is in it.
Oh, yes.
Then they go a little too crazy where he has Baby Godzilla and he does like the tail pumped drop kick, which I love. So what's interesting is your question was, do I have like a history with Godzilla? And I do. I love original Godzilla, which is why I was so disappointed with the MonsterVerse.
Oh, segue.
as it was.
Right.
And which is why I didn't jump on this show when it first aired, even though I had Apple TV.
Right.
I was like, I feel like every movie in this franchise has either just missed the mark or whoa, have they missed the mark? And I wasn't really excited for it, and I kind of gave it a shot on a whim as I was like laying in bed unable to sleep one night. And I think I posted my first reaction to the show was I fell asleep 3 times during the first episode, and I was like, man, I just can't do it.
Yeah.
And then when I was more awake, I gave it another shot, and the ending of episode 1 and episodes 2 and 3 really hooked me to the point where I was like, okay, not only do I want to talk about this show with you, but this might be the best that the MonsterVerse has been in its new form. So yeah, that is my usual long answer to your short question. What about you? Where do you stand with Godzilla for your life?
Yeah, you and I are similar in age, so like our experiences are very similar. I didn't like stay home from school and watch Godzilla, but like I know on Saturdays I watched a lot of Godzilla movies. And I like the cheesy, guy in the suit Godzilla. I remember like he shows up randomly in Pee-wee's Big Adventure at the very end when they're going through the Hollywood studios. I remember watching like the 1985, I think, Godzilla movie where it's got
Perry Mason.
Perry Mason, exactly. He's in it. And I remember that was kind of scary seeing that as a kid because I think I was like, I don't know, 3 or something. And like the way Godzilla is treated in that movie, it's scary. There's a sequence in the beginning of the movie where they find these like sailors on a boat and like they're all irradiated and like some kind of creature got them. I think Godzilla got them. And I remember that sequence being really scary. And then at the very end of the movie, the way they defeat Godzilla is they like make it seem like there's these like seagulls. He seems to follow seagulls around, and then they make Godzilla jump into a volcano. And I remember as like a little kid feeling really sad as Godzilla jumped into the volcano.
I remember I had a VHS copy of King Kong versus Godzilla.
Right.
And I watched that on repeat, and I remember being really angry that they appear to give you they kind of give you the idea that King Kong won because he was the good guy in that movie, and I was like, "There's no fucking way a giant ape is beating Godzilla, who could shoot fire from his friggin' mouth and has steel plates, armor plates on his back." You know, like, I also feel like it's very traditional for like, I guess kids our age was like we all went through that dinosaur phase as a kid, and like Godzilla played into that dinosaur phase where like, oh, dinosaurs are cool, and oh my god, there's a monster that is basically a giant T-Rex that can breathe fire, and so I just feel like there was definitely a lot of Godzilla worship when we were younger. We were like that second wave because obviously the original Godzilla came out in the 50s, and then the Toho movies are coming out almost year by year from like the early 60s into the early to mid 70s. And we were just lucky to get them on VHS when we were young. But yeah, like it was just always like also like monsters. Like my favorite movie of all time is Jaws, about a giant shark, and it plays into the like one of my favorite subgenres in horror is monster. You know, whether it's nature horror or just monster horror. You know, I give me a big creature, and I'm typically a very happy person.
Yeah, and it's funny because like with these movies, you aren't a very happy person. I'm looking at the list of MonsterVerse films right now, and there's Godzilla, which is from 2014, directed by Gareth Edwards. Then you have Kong Skull Island, it's directed by Jordan Vaught Roberts. Godzilla King of the Monsters. Now, Danny, that's Michael Dougherty, right? And he directed like Krampus and Trick or Treat, right?
Yes.
Okay. That one. Okay, so I have opinions on all of these movies, but let's just round them out right here. We got Godzilla versus Kong, and that's Adam Wingard. Now he did You're Next, right?
Yes.
Okay, he's
part of that crew that did You're Next, The Guest.
Right.
Yeah.
And he did. He also did like the Death Note movie that was for Netflix. I remember that was kind of controversial. He was on what's the podcast that has the guy who directed Critters and The Stand? The
Postmortem.
Yeah, Postmortem. Thank you so much.
Mick Garris.
Mick Garris. Thank you. Yes, and I remember listening to Adam Wingard on there, and it was a really good interview. But I mean, I have opinions about all of these movies. I can kind of just do a real brief catch up so that we can get to talking about the show. But I kind of have similar feelings to you. Like these MonsterVerse movies, some of them have amazing visuals, but they're never ever able to like capture. I don't really feel emotions when I watch these movies. I'm just like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like Godzilla looks cool, but I'm not really worried for the main characters. I'm not really worried for Godzilla very often or King Kong. There's good visuals in each of these, but they're just not. I don't know. They're not like engrossing. And I remember being very bored watching Godzilla of 2014. What about you?
So I think that is where this series so far has been so surprising and refreshing for me. My biggest problem with the MonsterVerse, the movies, has been they've been unable to get the balance of good human characters with monster action. I think that Gareth Edwards' movie is probably the closest, but it wasted so much potential with its human characters. They tease you with Bryan Cranston, and then he just dies. Right. They basically brought Ken Watanabe in just to go, let them fight, and then that's it. He's no use for him anymore. So and then they focus on like who's it, Aaron Taylor Johnson and Elizabeth Olsen, and uh, I didn't care about any of those characters. That movie got the best friggin' monster fight though. The Godzilla fight at the end where he breathes fire down that friggin' Muto's mouth is still one of my favorite moments. The problem was I felt like I waited 3 hours to get to that moment.
Yes, yes.
And then I think what happened was they heard that complaint and they went way too far in the other direction where basically just cut and paste human characters with like diabolical villain plans for the next two movies.
Yeah.
And they focused too much on the monsters.
Right.
And the fighting became almost, dare I say, boring after a while because you've just seen so much of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then Godzilla versus Kong, let's face it, it was a monster version of Batman v Superman.
Yes.
It was the exact same plot to the point where I literally turned to whoever I saw within the theater and I was like, oh my God, they're literally going to team up against Mechagodzilla. And when is Wonder Woman coming into this movie?
Yes. And King Kong was going to stand over Godzilla with a spear. And he was going to say Mothra, and King Kong was
that was the big joke.
Yeah,
that was the big joke of that.
Yes,
yes. Mothra. Why did you say that name? Again, to bring it back to this show, I think this show so far over 3 episodes has the most compelling human characters so far, which I'm sure we'll get into very quickly.
Yeah.
And it has some really good monster stuff sprinkled in over these first 3 episodes.
Yes.
I love some of the creature designs, and it needs to be said right off the bat, from the time Wyatt Russell became an actor, we have been waiting for some producer to have the balls to go, okay, I know it's obvious, but can we get you to play a young version of your dad? And then we're going to cast your dad as the later version.
Right.
It literally, like, from the second I saw him in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I was like, oh my God, they have to do a young Kurt Russell. And I fucking love how they do it in this show. They even do one dissolve from Wyatt Russell into Kurt Russell. They did even the credits are like it's like and starring Wyatt Russell as Lieutenant Lee Shaw, and then his name just dissolves into Kurt Russell. I'm like, fucking finally they did it. So kudos to them.
Right.
It seems so easy, but I feel like people were unwilling to do it for a while, and they finally. Now we got to do the Goldie Hawn Kate Hudson movie.
Oh my God, maybe she'll be in this too. I don't know. But that's the funny thing about this show, right? Is that for a show about Godzilla and other monsters, it's actually like very convoluted as far as the plot, right? Because like, okay, so one of the things that you said was that they have this great balance between the monsters and the human characters. There's something about the human characters in this. I don't know what the difference is, but I'm actually intrigued by the human characters. I'm intrigued by Wyatt Russell's version of Kurt Russell in the past and his 2 friends back then. And then I'm really interested in this Japanese girl's present day story, right? And like finding out about her father. And they kind of jump. It's kind of funny, Danny. We review all these shows, and a lot of times the shows that we review, they have that Lost effect where there's flashbacks and then there's present day, like Yellow Jackets we covered, right? There's something else that we covered where they kind of jump back and forth. But I just wanted to say one thing before we kind of go into the actual episodes, that for this show, the behind the scenes stuff, this show is made by a guy named Chris Black, who has a lot of experience with TV. He worked on like Desperate Housewives, but he also worked on like Star Trek Enterprise, a show called. Go ahead. What are you saying?
Mad Men, Severance. He was a producer on Ugly Betty. Yeah,
he has a ton of experience as like a producer and writing shows, right? Xena Warrior Princess. This show Cleopatra 2525, which I think I'm the only person that knows even existed. And then the other person, though, that worked on the show, this is the part that's really intriguing to me, and Brian would be interested in this too, is a guy named Matt Fraction, who's a comic book writer. And he's most famous for writing this comic book Hawkeye, which like the Disney Plus show is really inspired by that version of Hawkeye. But Matt Fraction was real big in comics for a while. Him and his wife are both comic book writers, and it's just really cool to see them working on this show. So
well, the director of the first 2 episodes is Matt Shackman, and he directed the entire WandaVision series. So there is kind of there is that comic book.
Yeah.
You know, you can see where there's like a comic book aspect to this.
Yeah.
I think Matt Fraction, if I saw on IMDb, he also worked on video games, a lot of the Marvel video games.
Sure.
And there is kind of that video game element to this in the sense that it feels like the characters are, you know, they're going after like a thing, or they have to get a thing to get them to the next level, you know, up. So it's like, we have Kate Kentaro and May and Kurt Russell, that group, they got to the airplane. Now it's time to go to the next level. And now they're flying to Alaska.
Right.
And now we have the ice level. So it does kind of feel like you have all of these elements, right? You have obviously the Toho Godzilla franchise. You have the MonsterVerse movies. You have a guy who's with tons of experience in TV producing. You have a guy who's a comic book writer who's worked on video games. You have a director who's worked with MCU TV series for Disney Plus, and the actors are all pretty experienced actors. At least, I mean, the ones that like I don't know like where I didn't look up every actor, but it feels like the actors here are a class above, and I think that's maybe why the acting feels, yeah, and maybe also whereas who plays the lead in the Conjuring movies? My brain is struggling. Patrick Wilson's wife, Vera Farmiga. Vera Farmiga. Her character in, I think it was King of the the one with Ghidorah.
Yeah.
Right? She's in that movie.
Yes.
She plays such a comical villain in that movie that it completely took me out of the movie.
Right.
And I feel like because whereas I'm normally watching one of these streaming shows going, oh my God, they stretched this out for 9 hours. This could have been a 2-hour movie.
Right.
Here I'm thinking, oh, good. They're stretching this out. They're letting it breathe. So we don't end up with a Vera Farmiga type character from that movie.
Yeah.
Or the way Samuel L. Jackson was in Kong Skull Island, where he almost felt like he was written as a 1950s pulp villain.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, that kind of character doesn't play in it for modern movies, I don't think. And it's like a level of overacting almost.
Right, right.
Yeah, you know, like early Bond villain stuff. And I think it plays out better slowed down over a series like this.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting point. It's like, I wonder if they think, well, we need some sort of like just over character to kind of compensate for these sort of other stick figure characters. Because I mean, that's something that happens in all Godzilla movies and even some of the King Kong movies too, where like everyone's just kind of like, okay, just show the monster, get to the monster. I know these guys are talking in a boardroom, everyone's stressed out, but we really just want to see the monsters fighting. And I think that the 2014 Gareth Edwards really struggles with that. But then with the movies that you've mentioned, it's just this over the top stuff. It's got this balance, like you keep saying, where no one seems over the top in the show so far. Like Kurt Russell and Wyatt Russell, they kind of seem like real badass, and you know, they're sort of this like rugged character. But even with that character, there's still that kind of flaw. Like you can kind of tell that he wants to get with the Japanese woman. There's this great sequence in I think it's the second episode where he meets her, and he's looking for I forget what the fuck her last name is, but like Doctor. I'm just gonna
Mora, Dr. Kiko Mora.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kiko Mora. And he's like, I'm looking for Dr. Mora. And he can't wrap his head around that she's Dr. Mora. And it's not even like she's like, she says her name and he still doesn't believe her. You know, he's like, oh, so are you his daughter? You know, and
I love that they each kind of have stereotype. Like she just assumes he's like a grunt soldier and he has like his assumptions about her as like a young female doctor. I thought that was well done. I like that. I thought it was interesting that the show started by establishing that she's married with a kid with the other guy.
Right.
And then the second episode shows kind of how the three of them meet, almost flashback style. There also feels like this series kind of adheres to the old Roger Corman. Roger Corman used to have a thing where it's like, you could only have if you got to make the movie, let's say 85 minutes, but every 10 minutes there has to either be a death or nudity. And it kind of feels like that here, where it kind of feels like every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes of this show, the episodes are for like 45 minutes. So it's like every 10 to 15 minutes, show a monster or show something. I think that's what helps it. So it's like you have that amazing scene, the one that you put in the background, where it's brief, but it's this amazing flashback scene where the main girl, Anna Sawai, who plays Kate, she goes to Japan, and you find out very quickly that she has basically PTSD because she was there during Gareth Edwards' Godzilla. She was there on G-Day. And there's this amazing scene of her on the bridge.
Right.
And Godzilla like swings around and mouth open. And oh my God, it's this like perfect moment of Godzilla on screen, even if it's so brief.
Yeah.
And it's like we just get that in a little flashback to help us understand, okay, this is who she is. This is why she's scared and why like that drill in Japan like gives her a panic attack. And I love that. Then the show starts with like that little John Goodman moment, and we get like this right off the bat. We get this like little monster fight that lasts for about a minute and a half of screen time, but it's like, oh shit, giant spiders fighting giant crab. Let's go. And it really just sets you up for what you're going to see. And I love that we're getting all these new monsters, as by the time we get to episode 3, there's one that looks like a mini Cthulhu that could freeze you with its tentacles. And I'm like, let's go.
It's super. Yeah. Like with all these Godzilla movies, and this even goes back to the like the Toho Godzilla movies too, there always seems to be like a scientist that kind of appreciates Godzilla and these giant monsters. They appreciate nature or like what like has kind of mutated out of nature, right? They're always like really interested in this stuff. Then there's the military that's just like, oh, we got to kill this fucking thing. We got to destroy this thing. And they really do set up that dynamic very early on with this show. One thing they keep repeating in every single episode is just how powerful Godzilla is. Like they're like, oh, is that going to do anything to him? They always say kind of stuff like that. They're, in the most recent episode, there's the military and they see him like approaching the beach, and they're like, is that armor? They're saying like about his plates on his back or whatever. And then Wyatt Russell's like, why would that thing need armor? He's like so powerful. And that sequence that we have in our background here that you just referenced, it's funny because the reason why Godzilla turns his head and looks at Kate is because he takes 2 fucking missiles right to the face, and it just makes him like kind of turn as if someone gave you a quick punch, and he just turns his head right back. It just shows how powerful he is. And I actually love Pacific Rim, and this is kind of the same genre. Yeah. But one of the things that Pacific Rim does really well is there's one kaiju attack where they show the main girl in a flashback, and they show her getting chased by a kaiju, and it shows like how incredibly scary that would be. And this show seems to capture that feeling of like, oh, we're completely helpless against these things. They are so big, they're so powerful. And I think that the dynamic of the show is going to be like, well, there's this military force. It eventually becomes Monarch. They're trying to like get rid of these monsters, and then there's the scientists that kind of appreciate these creatures. They want to learn more about them and what they're just them being around means, right?
So this is my biggest issue, maybe with the whole MonsterVerse series, and I think,
Yeah.
and I'm really hoping that this series addresses this at some point, and that is, what the hell is Monarch? Monarch has been established as this group that has been studying the Titans since
World War II.
Kong Skull Island, and since the 1950s in Japan and in the Pacific. Do they want to? So, like, we have people that are working for Monarch that seem like they want to, like you said, we want to study these things. We want to, track how many there are and catalog them and study them and see if we could live amongst them. And then we have just we're Monarch and we need to take these monsters out. And I think that, like, the show has to kind of figure out what Monarch really is. And because, like, it can't be both. It can't do both things. And it feels like the Monarch that's chasing down Kate, Kataro, and May in like 2015 are modern day characters. They're basically like, we need to hide the fact that these things exist, and we need to get those files and destroy them before you show these to the world, which kind of feels like a 180 from the Monarch of the past. Like the military is the military kind of feels like they're going against what Monarch wants. Like Monarch is there. John Goodman's like, I want you to see this. Here, I'm going to throw these files in the ocean and hope they get to you. And Dr. Mora and Bill Randa, played by Anders Holm, they're the ones who are with Wyatt Russell. The three of them seem like they're out there to study these things. What's his name? Anders Holm character, Bill Randa, he's like the main character's grandfather. He is like a cryptozoologist who's there to study them and study the Mudos, which was a word established in Gareth Edwards' movie.
Right.
So he's there to study these monsters, but then it's like, we want to keep it under wraps. We want to destroy them. And it's like, okay, make up your mind, right?
Right. Well, I think this show, because we keep kind of talking about how it was like influenced by comic books, or like that, like people that worked on comic book shows have worked on this show. And, one of the big shows was there was Agent Carter and there was Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And Monarch has always kind of been like this sort of like S.H.I.E.L.D. type organization in these MonsterVerse movies. In all these movies where they want to have like a shared universe, they always have to have some kind of organization like S.H.I.E.L.D. that's kind of like in the background. They kind of just copy and paste that right from Iron Man and put it into all these these movies, right? Like one of the lamest examples is that group that was in
The Mummy.
The Mummy, exactly. Prodigium,
I was going to say, I don't even remember what they're called, but they had like it was like Russell Crowe's Dr. Jekyll, and that was that they even took that, like, all the actors took that picture for like a big time publication, well, maybe Vanity Fair or something, where they were like, the next generation of Universal monsters, and the movie flopped so hard.
Right, yes. Oh God, it's horrible. Yeah, but the MonsterVerse has kept going, and I think that this is sort of like showing us the origin of Monarch, which is like their equivalent of S.H.I.E.L.D. And I think that the real foundation of it is this trinity of characters, Wyatt Russell, and then Bill Randa, and then Keiko Mura, right? So those three, and John Goodman, I didn't even realize this until I like just was looking this up on Wikipedia, but John Goodman is an ancestor of Bill Randa. So like it's kind of like you have this one side of the family that's really into just like uncovering the monsters, letting the world know about them, kind of trying to figure out where they come from. And then there's this other side that's trying to like extinguish the monsters. And we really see that come to a head in the third episode where Wyatt Russell has basically gotten the military on board now. Lee Shaw, I'm finally going to say his fucking name. Lee Shaw has the military on board, and they want to do this test to basically draw out a creature, and then Godzilla is the creature that shows up. The military, I actually really, this is one of my favorite parts of these 3 episodes, was that Lee is trying to talk to his superior and get him on board for this plan. And then the superior is like, well, I had to ask like 4 guys above me just to get what you needed, which was like this, basically nuclear materials. And, oh, go ahead.
No, I think it was like 150 tons of uranium, something like that, which he makes a comment like that's more than we dropped on Japan. And then they have like that awkward look over to Dr. Morrow, like, oh shit. Like,
right. Yeah. And so
I don't know if you've said her name, but Marie Yamamoto is the actress, and she's fantastic in that role. I really am liking her. I think my favorite part, I think the thing, we keep coming back to this idea of like the balance between monsters and characters. And I think what I love about this show so far is they split the timeline and they give you a core of 3 characters to follow. And the chemistry between that core of 3 characters is actually really good. So you get Lee Shaw, Bill Randa, and Dr. Kikomura in the 1950s, studying the Titans, getting attacked by Titans and all this stuff. And then you have their ancestors, their grandkids, Kate and Kentaro, played by Anna Sawai and Ren Watabe, and then his kind of ex-girlfriend, who's like a computer genius, May, played by Kiersey Clemens, who I've been a big fan of for years. She did a great Netflix horror movie called Sweetheart that for some reason they decided, let's not put that into theaters, let's dump it on Netflix, and it was excellent. And you get each of this set of 3 characters have really good chemistry with each other.
Agreed.
And what I think is great is they're able to show their chemistry while focusing on Monarch and the monsters that we want to see.
Yes.
So yes, we figure out that Kentaro and May have some personal issues, former couple, bad breakup, but that's it's not dwelled on. It's not like it doesn't become a 30-minute part of a 45-minute episode.
That's a really good point.
It allowed, like, they basically just through like a couple lines of dialogue give us all of that we need to understand about their relationship so that they can focus on getting into these files. And why is that a picture of your grandmother in a Godzilla footprint? And here's a map of this, and how does that, and it's like we're kind of putting this puzzle piece together of they're trying to figure out what their grandparents were doing 50 years ago. And I think that's the biggest thing that I like, is that how all the characters have the, like we talked about, like the tension, kind of almost sexual tension between Lee Shaw and Dr. Kikomura when they first meet. And that doesn't become a crutch of the show. It's not like, we got to do a couple of love triangles now. And I hope that doesn't become a thing of this show.
Right.
Actually, I don't think it can, since Kate and Kentaro are half siblings. That would be weird. But unless we're going with the Clueless route, I don't know.
Jesus. Yeah. That in itself, though, is real interesting to talk about, though, because they're both looking for their dad, or they're trying to figure out, like, what's going on with my father. And they have this really great sequence where Kate travels to Japan, and then she goes to this apartment and she finds that there's people living in the apartment. and it's essentially her half brother, and then the mother of his mother, who happens to be like this woman that she didn't even realize she was having an affair with Kate's father. And they have this great question. I think it might be in the second episode where they're like, "Do you ever wonder who he was with first? Like, who did he get with first? And like, who was he cheating on?" And so that in itself, that would be a movie in another setting. Like that could just be a movie where it's like there's a dad and he lived a double life and he had two families. Like that in itself. And you could do this thing, well, there's the family that's in Japan and then there's the family in the United States. But that is just basically a device to get Kate from the United States over to Japan. Because of course you want to play up that Japanese part of Godzilla. Like you can't really have a Godzilla movie and not, give homage to Japan, right? And I mean, that's all interesting in itself.
That's
Then
why
you
Ken
have
Watanabe said, "Let them fight."
there you go. Yes, they checked off the box there. But what I actually really love too is just to kind of go along with that is there's this great world building because they show like a post G-Day Japan, and Kate is completely traumatized. I think we should probably talk about why she's traumatized, but she's deathly afraid of Godzilla, and it gives her like claustrophobia at different points. She freaks out. She has panic attacks like multiple times in the show. And when she travels to Japan, they land on a plane, and people come on the plane. They're just sort of like disinfecting it, and there's some sort of like spores or something on there, or they're worried about that. And then when she's driving in a car, like a cab in town, there's like just fucking gigantic missiles that reset themselves right on the road, and it's like, okay, they're like ready to fight if Godzilla shows up. And the world that they're kind of talking about now, this modern world in Japan, it kind of reminds me of the world building that they had in Pacific Rim, where they had like whole industries and stuff based on kaiju, right? I was gonna say, did you want to kind of tell people why Kate's traumatized by Godzilla?
Yeah, sorry, I was looking to see if the Gareth Edwards Godzilla movie was streaming for free, and it's not. And
Oh,
I was like, you know what? If it's streaming for free, I think I'm going to give it a rewatch.
uh-oh.
And I'm like, nah, I don't really feel like spending $4 to rent that movie again. But
Right.
yeah, oh my god, what a fucking scene. She's like on. I guess she was on the school bus, right? She was like, I guess, a
Yes,
teacher,
yes,
and
yes.
the bridge is collapsing, and she's like, she opens the back door to the bus and she's trying to offload the kids, and literally I think she gets 4 or 5 kids off, and then like the bus just goes over. And so like this show is like, yeah. And I think, and again, I in one scene, this show did addressed one of my biggest problems with, oh god, I don't want to trigger anybody, but with Batman versus Superman, and really with Man of Steel. Really, let me tell you about Zack Snyder. No, I'm kidding.
Uh-oh,
But like
uh-oh.
but like one of my biggest problems with Man of Steel was Superman and Zod destroy Metropolis, and so many people have to be dead.
Of
And
course.
in Batman v Superman, I thought they did a really poor job of addressing, like they made it as if like the one person who died was that one guy who Ben Affleck's Bruce Wayne found, and he was like, oh no.
Yeah.
And I thought that just to compare collateral damage, I thought they did such a good job here of showing that, like, yeah, Godzilla's cool. He's a giant dinosaur walking around and he's fighting those Mutos and he's, saving humanity.
Yeah.
But yeah, he, like, a fucking busload of kids died. And probably tens of thousands of other people are dead. And people are left with, like, generational trauma now
Yeah.
from this, one incident. And
Yeah.
I think it really did a great job of like explaining why she's, as like nervous as she is and why she's, I mean, that's friggin' traumatic.
Yes, yes. When the busload of kids fell off the bridge, I was like, "Oh, dang! Okay, they did that.
Yeah,
That's
like, oh, we're going there.
yeah."
Okay. Well,
So
we're gonna talk spoilers, I guess. I mean, they went there in episode one. The ending of episode one was shocking. They basically, I mean, I think we're led to believe that the grandmother, Dr. Mora dies like at the hands of like these like mini Muto egg monsters, almost in a scene that reminded me a lot, and I'm sure it reminded you a lot of Alien.
yeah,
You know, dropping down, scientists dropping down into uh, a kind of a big enclosure filled with eggs,
right.
where you can kind of see what's going on, and you're all thinking to yourself, don't go near the eggs. What are you
Yeah,
doing?
yeah,
And
yeah.
of course, all the eggs hatch. And yeah, she basically, I mean, unless they do something weird, I'm pretty sure that was meant to be her death scene.
Agreed. And
And
that was
we,
very well done too. It's funny. I got to give a little shout out to the Weekly Planet. That's one of my favorite podcasts. It's a YouTube channel too, and it's Mr. Sunday is the guy that's like the host of that. And they've been covering like all the movies in the MonsterVerse. They did the Godzilla one. They're right now they're on Kong Skull Island, and they were comparing Kong Skull Island and the visuals in that to the King Kong of Peter Jackson's King Kong, right? And they were saying how like there's some really disturbing scenes in that with the bugs and stuff. Do you remember like that one fucking slug thing that puts its
that
head over?
eats Gollum.
Yes, yes, yeah. I still kind of get that weird kind of chill
So
feeling thinking about that.
I read that in the original 1930s King Kong, there was a scene like that I think that they cut, and that's
Whoa.
why Peter Jackson was so insistent to do like a giant bug scene.
Yeah.
But I think Peter Jackson's King Kong as a standalone, I thought was mostly excellent,
Yeah.
with maybe a little too much here and there.
Right.
And
Right.
it was, I mean, it's not as good as Roland Emmerich's Godzilla.
Oh, Danny, what the fuck?
That was a joke, everybody. Please don't attack me in the comments. When I started working at the movie theater in 1998, my first job,
Yeah.
that movie, I think, was the Memorial Day 1998 movie. And I started at the movie theater in early June. And so that was the big movie. And I remember going in on my break and just looking at it and going, what were they thinking?
Yep.
How did this get made?
Yep.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
at least I never thought that with any of the MonsterVerse movies. Like number one, they got Godzilla right.
Oh, yes.
Done.
Yes.
So yeah, I can't even criticize the modern monsters for that.
Yeah, and like it's funny though, because like we're talking about like King Kong, Godzilla, obviously they cross over and stuff, and then we're talking about that Peter Jackson King Kong where there's some pretty gruesome deaths. There's actually some pretty gruesome deaths in Kong Skull Island too. But when Mora, when what's her Keiko Mora, when she dies, that was like really disturbing to me because it's not like when you have someone that's like kind of crawling out of an abyss on a rope, the easiest thing you can do is just have them fall like into smoke or shadow, and it's like, oh, she died. But no, it's like the fucking bugs come up, they're like wrapped around her legs, then they like kind of wrap even further and like pull her down. So you were saying like I don't know if she's gonna survive. I mean, she has to survive on some level, right? Because she already has had the kids. Okay.
So literally, when the show starts,
Yeah.
the opening scene of the three of them in the van,
Yeah.
and they're talking. Wyatt Russell's in the back seat, and he's like, "Yeah, well, you two, you got it made. You have a beautiful kid, and you found each other." And then like they hold hands, and they're like, "Yeah, everything is great." So, so the character that would become, I guess,
Kate's father.
Kate's father is already at home somewhere. We've actually not met him aside from the one flashback
Yeah.
on G-Day, where she survives Kate, obviously, after the school bus incident, and she finds her father, and her father's like, "Oh my God, I'm so glad you're alive, but now I must leave you." And that's really all we ever see of him. And so, like, there's got to be a lot more, digging into his past and what was going on. There's all this stuff we didn't even really talk about, with like how he hid the Monarch tapes, and she had like the keys from like the American office, that like she goes to Japan now, and the keys open up a safe in Japan. And there's like really some cool spy shit going on
Yes,
too
agreed. Yeah.
in this. That's where Kiersey Clemens' character comes in, because she's like a techie who's able to like transfer files from old to new formats, and then that alerts Monarch that people are digging through our files, and there's kind of like this covert, now they're running from Monarch aspect to it. I just finished watching Miss Marvel, and so I keep thinking of Damage Control
Oh, yes.
chasing after Miss Marvel in that series, to Monarch chasing after them in this series. But
Right.
yeah, it I'm really digging it so far. The next episode comes out, I think it's every Friday, so that's December 1st is episode 4. I think
Nice.
it's 9 episodes, the series.
I think it's
9 or
10.
10.
It's 10, I
10.
think.
Yeah, but I'm really digging it. I can't wait to see what other monsters, if they're going to go back to some of the ones we saw in what was the movie called? Was it Godzilla King of the Monsters?
Yeah,
The one with
King of
Ghidorah?
Monsters, yeah.
Yeah, so that movie had like a Titan battle royal at the end, and I wonder if we're going to see more of those monsters. Maybe. Hey, who knows? Like, it's the same universe. Do we get King Kong in this?
King of
Do
Monsters.
we get, do we get elements of Ghidorah? Do we get, I'm sure Rodan will show up at some point.
Yeah.
These are all. I'm just excited. Like, Mothra should be in this at some point. Maybe we get
Yeah.
the little midget twins.
Well, okay. First off, I don't think midget is PC, but that's
Oh,
okay.
I'm sorry. Little people.
Little people. But besides that, they are actually in those Godzilla movies. They're in Godzilla King of the Monsters. I think they're in the King Kong one as well. They're not little people though. There's 2 Asian women that.
Yes, I remember. Okay.
Yeah. But what I was gonna say was I just wanted to say one thing about Rodan, and then I was gonna ask you one more question about a Monarch person before we kind of wrap things up. But I remember Rodan kind of scared me as a kid too, because I remember watching like the first Rodan movie when I was like real young, and there's a whole bunch of sequences where they go into caves, and there's like sort of like these like baby Rodans where they're not like flying around yet, and they just kind of eat people in the caves, and that really freaked me out. All these like Japanese guys just getting picked off by these monsters in the caves. But I actually really like the sequence with Rodan in Godzilla King of Monsters. They're in some like South American city. I don't know, it might even be like Brazil or something. And just the way they made Rodan come out of a volcano, and then like when he flies over the city, just like all the blocks just kind of get like blown over, and you see all this dust going by. I think a guy like ejects out of a jet at one point. He like catches it in his mouth. It's really great sequence. I would dig it if Rodan came back for this show. But I was going to ask you, kind of before we tie this all together, is we are seeing like Monarch in action in the present day too, and they have some like Monarch agents. To me, I kind of felt like that was the least interesting part of the show. Was just like the
Tim,
Monarch, right? Right.
Which I don't know how versed you are in Monty Python, but all I could ever think of is, you can call me Tim,
Right.
the wizard from like Holy Grail. I'm
Holy
like,
Grail.
yeah, that. And again, like that's where I need clarity as a fan, because like, what is in the modern world, everyone knows monsters exist.
Right.
So is there really this like grand conspiracy of, oh God, we can't let everyone know that we knew Godzilla existed 50 years ago.
That's what I think it is. It's like retroactively, like, oh shit, we can't let people know we knew about this. That's what I think it is.
I I don't know. I guess I'm not really into that aspect of the story.
Right.
And I thought that, like, there was like this crazy car crash scene in Japan, and the Japanese police are not very effective in that scene. They're like, "Are you sure you're not just drunk?"
Yeah, yeah. I think they're in Korea by that point, right?
What?
Because
Oh,
they kind of like Kurt Russell takes them to like
no, no, no,
Korea.
no. That was when she's fleeing from Monarch. That was in Japan.
Oh, okay. Yes, I'm
Then
sorry.
they
You
go
are
to Korea,
1,000%
and
right.
and and
Yes.
and Kurt Russell, Lieutenant Shaw, meets like his old buddy, and
Right.
he's the one that flies them to Alaska. Yeah.
Right. You're 1,000% right. Yes,
So
yes,
now,
yes.
so where we're at, because we're pretty much closing up now. We're
Yeah.
we're, we're getting ready for episode 4. We have Lieutenant Shaw, Kate, Kentaro, and May, the modern cast. That's Kurt Russell. They are in, and I almost said Antarctica, Alaska, following the path of the dad, who is not dead, who we think is very much alive. And they are up against this crazy Titan that looks like I said earlier, a mini Cthulhu with tentacles that freeze you.
Yeah.
And yeah, I also, like you mentioned that scene earlier on the beach where they launched a nuke at Godzilla.
Oh, yeah.
They make that seem like they got him.
I know.
And of
I know.
course, and I'm just like, I remember in King of the Monsters, they literally are like, we need to wake Godzilla up. Let's give him a nuclear missile. And they and doesn't Ken Watanabe like sacrifice himself
Yes.
to
Yes.
deliver the nuclear weapon that
Yes.
explodes and like wakes Godzilla up?
Yes.
So I'm like, obviously that doesn't kill Godzilla. So, like, did he just go like, big explosion, dive back in the water? Like, I want clarity on that.
Yeah.
Like I said, look, the series is not perfect, but it's
Yeah.
the best distillation of the MonsterVerse that we've had. The characters are great. The monster effects, they don't feel cheap and TV-esque. They feel legit movie style monsters.
Oh yeah.
I like the new monsters that we've seen.
Yeah.
The few times we've seen Godzilla, he's looked fucking majestic. So yeah, I'm really excited to see this series continue.
Yeah. And Danny and I will be covering this every week because we both have Apple TV. So we can cover a new episode every weekend. We'll just review the one that came out on Friday. But that's not all you get when you subscribe to the Lasercast. Danny is a content making machine, constantly reviewing movies. I think you saw a couple in the past few days, right, Danny?
Yeah, I have some shorts up on the channel now. Eli Roth's Thanksgiving was my annual tradition movie on Wednesday with my friend Josh. We've been going to the movies on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving for 25 years now.
Wow.
We started with horror, End of Days, starring Arnold
Nice.
Schwarzenegger, and we just did Eli Roth's Thanksgiving. You can see my review on the channel, spoiler free, 45 seconds. I also have a 45-second review of a really cool indie movie from Blumhouse called The Passenger, starring Kyle Gallner and Johnny Birchhold. Kind of real world horror, really interesting character study there. I watched one of my favorite horror movies of the year last night. Gonna recommend it to you.
Okay.
Maybe we talk about it later on. It's called The Elderly.
Okay.
It's directed by the pair that did another movie called The Passenger, not the one I just talked about, from 2021.
Okay.
It's a Spanish horror movie. It's so creepy. It feels like a companion piece to Hereditary. Very scary, and they throw in a kind of sci-fi element that I wasn't expecting, and I'd love to hear your take on it.
Okay.
It's streaming on VOD. I rented it for I think $5 on Vudu. Again, foreign horror. I love foreign horror.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. And I'll probably do a short 30-second, 40-second review of that coming up very soon.
Nice, man. Nice. Well, thank you for always putting out so much stuff on our channel. You guys make sure that you subscribe. Let us know if you are a fan of the Monsterverse, if there's a particular movie in this series that you really like King of the Monsters or Kong Skull Island. And let us know if you're digging this show, Monarch Legacy of Monsters. We'll see you.